Hello, my name is Anika Lindqvist. I'm the founder of Pedestrian Space at pedestrianspace.org, which is a platform devoted to issues of urban resilience, originally born out of a great focus on issues of walkability, but it's since grown to be about many other issues related to sustainable urbanism and what we call urban resilience, and unpacking all the many dimensions related to that. And I wanted to record this today because last week, I was diagnosed with COVID. I had a positive home test. It is today, October 25th. Happy Friday, Friday, October 25th. 5 days ago, I tested negative, so I'm recovering well, thankfully. But last week, I had a couple really down days. Those of you who have COVID and experienced perhaps some of the negative aspects of it know what I'm talking about. As we know, COVID is here. COVID's here to stay. For anybody who, sort of feels panic when they hear about that, we have to get used to the fact that COVID is here to stay, and especially in places like where I live, autumn is here, winter's starting. It is the traditional flu season. For as long as I have lived in places where there is a winter and autumn, period, we have very traditional flu season. Many viruses going around, and pre-COVID, there were also flus and viruses you had to be worried about, and viruses that would have the hospital waiting room filled up with people of all generations because, like clockwork, every year at this time, it is flu season. So I don't mean to dismiss the seriousness that COVID can lead to for people, but as I understand, COVID strains are typically more contagious but less lethal. That's just what my understanding is. And as my doctor said last week, COVID is here. It's here to stay until the end of time. So let's not have too much panic while we also take care of our immune systems and allow ourselves time for recovery. And I'm recording this today because part of my research and part of the work of Pedestrian Space relates to this topic of the 15-minute city. I founded Pedestrian Space originally as an Instagram account in 2020. It was actually at the beginning of the pandemic, as it was announced and acknowledged. Spring 2020, a lot of countries were beginning to go into lockdown. I believe that began to happen around March or so. We were living in Sweden, which notoriously did not have a lockdown. Please don't let that fool you. There were so many restrictions on the ground. So it wasn't that it was a free for all. There was a lot of restrictions on the ground. I remember in the city I lived in, within a few months of the pandemic, I mean, there were times that the city felt like an absolute ghost town. So a lot was happening on the ground in terms of restrictions. I started Pedestrian Space during that time as an Instagram account, mainly to begin documenting what I call, best practices and barriers of walkability as I was seeing them in my own environment. Best practices for those areas that might be transferable for other areas might not be, considering geographic, climatic, social concerns. But I was using my time with Pedestrian Space in the early days to visually document with my camera and with my phone what I felt and observed as best practices and barriers of walkability. It was around that time, maybe April 2020, that I heard about the 15-minute city. And anybody who's heard me talk, done a few public talks on this now, and throughout several workshops, anybody who's heard me talk about this, I always share how a light bulb went off when I read about this concept as developed by researcher Carlos Moreno. And I had this sort of cartoon light bulb moment because I felt like, that's what I experience in my environment right now. I grew up as a Southern Californian kid, completely dependent on my parents driving around. Later on, dependent on myself driving around after I got my license. So I grew up in very car dominant environments. I didn't grow up in urban environments where I popped over to the, corner store down the block for, ingredients for breakfast or dinner. I did not walk to school. I did not walk to parks. I grew up with a completely car dominant life. So for me, this urban lifestyle for in which I can walk everywhere for my daily needs, which I had also experienced prior to that time during the pandemic. For me, it's a revelation, and it continues to be. It's my norm now. I've lived in now many places where I've experienced that, and I really never take it for granted. However, I also think it's a baseline for sustainable cities and for sustainable urban development. What are we doing if we're developing cities that people can't walk in? To me, that's just absurd. So I wanted to pop in here today and share a little bit because while I was down and out with COVID, I was thinking a lot about the pandemic and remembering how that time was so honestly, sorry to say, but fascinating. A lot was going on with urbanism, a lot was going on with public space. This is how I got turned on to the 15-minute city as a concept, which, as we know, really relates to very old-fashioned, many historic paradigms of good urban planning. I personally really am fond of the repackaging of it and how it's taken the world by storm. I was in a talk this week, a panel talk with Driving Urban Transitions and with fellow panelists on the topic of community engagement and the 15-minute city. This is part of my current PhD research here in Warsaw. And I still come up consistently on misunderstandings and some of the conspiracy talk, that bubbled up. For any of you who have been following the 15-minute city concept and its related conspiracy threads, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't, there was, for a period of time, some consider it, or maybe just a very vocal minority, as often happens, backlash, people looking at the 15-minute city, kind of threading it up with pandemic conspiracies and this idea that the 15-minute city is designed to silo people, to ghettoize communities. And, this for me is really fascinating. I mean, honestly, laughable if it didn't really take off so much and actually cause news headlines and affect policy in some places. But the idea that proximity planning, planning for people to have diverse amenities near their home, things like parks, schools, playgrounds, food shops, clinics, the idea that in so doing, people are being ghettoized or trapped in their neighborhoods is really ridiculous. I mean, we really need to squash this once and for all. I'm seeing it come up even in some discussions with professionals, this idea that the 15-minute city, is siloing people, and nothing can be further from the truth. There's absolutely nothing about this concept. There's absolutely nothing about urban planning principles which prioritize walkability and which prioritize cyclability, saying that word, or efficient public transportation at a local level. There's nothing about these types of principles that say you can't leave your neighborhood. That's who's coming up with this nonsense, what it does mean is that any person in these neighborhoods has the option for this practical level of proximity. Who's going to argue, oh, I don't like having, food stores too close to me. I don't like having a clinic that I can walk to in 5 minutes. I'd rather take an hour, to go to a clinic when I'm sick. Nobody's arguing this nonsensical drivel. And if they are, they're trolling. I really truly believe that. So the idea that we prioritize this proximity planning, it's not only to benefit you, one person. It's about a collective community concern. Maybe I have the liberty, the ability, the privilege to hop in a car to drive across town to grocery shop or to go to the clinic or to get some specialty thing done. But what about other people in the neighborhood who don't? People who can't drive, people who don't always have the opportunity, the time to be driving all over, a larger city or a medium-sized city to run their errands. The idea that the 15-minute city, this conspiracy notion that the 15-minute city is siloing people. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense to me. Neighborhoods are fluid. If you have a grocery store on your block, nobody's stopping you from going 20 minutes to two neighborhoods over to another grocery store. You're free to do that. Nobody's stopping you. What that grocery store means is that perhaps for people like myself who don't want to necessarily travel all the time for such basic needs, they have that option. For people for whom mobility is limited or time is limited, expenses are limited, this offers a quality of life at the practical local level. It's really as basic as that. I'm having a hard time unpacking why the conspiracy and the ideas about the 15-minute city siloing people continues, because neighborhoods will continue to be fluid. There's nothing about this concept that denies that. I currently live in what I would say is a 5-minute neighborhood lifestyle. I exist at the 5-minute neighborhood level most days of the week. And some of you might say, well, that's too bad. Well, luckily, I'm the person living it, and I'm the person appreciating it as a mother to two young children. And I believe the personal is important to bring up, even when I'm in a context representing myself as a researcher or definitely as an advocate. We are, at the end of the day, all human and inhabiting these environments. So I think these personal stories are important. And these narratives of people and how they appreciate the proximity, for me, are really fascinating. Stay tuned for my research coming out soon that documents some of this. This is what I've been busy with in Warsaw, is documenting also residential narrative at various workshops, people of all ages. I love it when I talk to a 20-something-year-old, and this has happened numerous times, who has moved to Warsaw from another Polish city or another European city and said, I was looking for the 15-minute city concept, or reality, we should say, when I was house hunting, when I was apartment hunting, when I was looking for my rental. I was looking for this because that's how I want to live. That's a value I have, to be able to have that. Again, it's coming back to quality of life. So I want to share a little something. I did put this across my platforms last week. You can find it on Instagram or LinkedIn or the Pedestrian Space Facebook page. This was 4 days ago, right? I had a little reflection, and I'm just going to read from it. Starts off, yep, I had COVID last week. Woohoo, I'm negative this week, recovering. I was also really happy that my partner was able to pivot to getting our youngest to school, taking care of our oldest, taking care of the household, and taking care of me on top of it all. And part of this also had to do with that proximity that we have in our neighborhood. It was almost seamless for him to pivot to taking care of the household and me. And also, very interesting, the ease with which he shifted to remote working, a norm that was set during the pandemic too, right? That ease he had, I believe, happened because of how things changed during the pandemic, with remote working becoming the norm. We've now changed back to more hybrid styles, but I found that interesting to think about also. So in May 2020, I wrote, I can reach all amenities, services, parks, and public spaces on foot within 15 minutes. Sidewalks have a good width. You see people in wheelchairs all around town, and thought has clearly been put into the benefit of trees lining pedestrian spaces. This morning, I was reminded in such a practical way about the benefits of a 15-minute city reality. I took the 5-minute bus ride to drop my kids off at school. Some mornings we walk. Then walked 15 minutes back to our block to go to the postal service. As I was there, I got a phone reminder of a doctor's appointment I had in 10 minutes. Uh-oh, I'd forgotten about that. But I was able to finish up at the post office, walk briskly to the hospital within about 7 minutes, and end up being fairly right on time. I went home to clean after that, and then to lunch at my favorite restaurant in the heart of the city. Later, I would make the 15-minute walk back to my kids' school to pick them up. And then on the way home, often during that time, you'd be able to enjoy the city, observe different elements of the seasons, maybe run a few errands before going home for the evening. So that was, let's see, yep, this was about I wrote that this week, but this was I wrote that in May 2020. I just posted this here this week in reflection. This was the city in central Sweden. Cities like this exist all over Europe, small, medium-sized cities that have the DNA of a 15-minute city. Maybe today they're challenged by car dominance, by cars cluttering sidewalks, by congestion, but the DNA is there. And part of what I love doing at Pedestrian Space through my talks, and now also through my research here, as a PhD student, what I look forward to continuing doing is documenting these residential narratives and stories of people that experience this lifestyle. A lot of my global talks with individuals actually relate to their past experience. They say, I grew up with this way, we've lost it. I grew up with the 5-minute neighborhood lifestyle. I grew up with a 15-minute neighborhood lifestyle. It's gone now, but I know what this is. When I heard about that concept, I knew what that was from my history. So this is part of the work I'm doing across my approaches, advocacy, the media, the research. So if you're listening and you're interested to chat, please feel free to connect. I do have a bit of a series started on our YouTube channel for Pedestrian Space, talking to people about their 15-minute city realities or memories from the past. And as the originator of the concept, Carlos Moreno says, don't get so hooked on the number. It could be a 10-minute, city reality that you experience, 7-minute, 5-minute neighborhood, a 20-minute suburb. Let's not get completely obsessed with the number, because that's really not the point. Proximity to services and this local level quality of life is really the point. And the freedom to move by foot in your community for your daily needs.